Prescription products require completion of an online medication consultation with an independent healthcare provider through the LifeMD platform and are only available if prescribed. Subscription required. Individual results may vary. Additional restrictions apply at lifemd.com. Read all warnings before using GLP-1s. Side effects may include a risk of thyroid C-cell tumors. Do not use GLP-1s if you or your family have a history of thyroid cancer.
If you've struggled for years to lose weight and have given up hope, did you know you can now access GLP-1 prescription medications through LifeMD? LifeMD is now offering eligible patients online access to GLP-1s, the breakthrough prescription medication that can help you lose body fat and weight. Listen to what people are saying.
Probably the easiest thing I've ever done. The medication comes in the mail, and it's very easy to use. I've been able to live my normal lifestyle, and I've lost 20 pounds already, and I've never felt better. It changed my life.
And here's the best part. Your insurance may cover 100% of the cost of your medication. So go to trylifemd.com to have your eligibility checked right now. Get started today at trylifemd.com. That's trylifemd.com.
I am back.
Yeah, because, Dan drank Miller High Life on the show last week, so that was his last ever episode.
Which is funny, because, he had the bourbon when we did the three-way episode, and the bourbon acceptable, and then he goes out and oh boy, yeah, that's unfortunate. I guess we got to find a new backup.
Yeah, new backup John. I think I called him fill-in John, something like that. Yeah,
that's fair. That's fair.
Something just keeps happening to all the backup Johns. Ariel leaves for the Riders. Dan drinks a really shitty beer. I don't know what we're going to do. I don't know what we're going to do around here.
The following podcast may contain discussions supported by science that may be considered dangerous to some listeners and conspiracy theorists. Discretion is advised.
The Three Down Greencast is brought to you by the Pile of Bones Brewing Company. Home delivery available in Regina at sassbeerdelivery.ca. Welcome to the Three Down Greencast. You are listening to the internet's Hey, let's get on the helicopter podcast. I am Joel Gasson, once again joined by the co-host of this here fine program, John Fraser, as he has returned after him and his lovely wife welcomed their daughter, their third child in the world last week. And quite frankly, after Dan Plaster's beer choice last week, we had to tell him that his services were no longer required.
Yeah, I'm not going to lie. After listening to that bit, Joel, I thought to myself, there's more family in town tonight. And I thought, well, maybe it'd just be easier if Dan came back on with Joel again. And then the Miller High Life line dropped.
Mm-hmm.
He was okay with the bourbon when there was both of us. Dan, you should have stuck to the bourbon. But then he has to go out and drop that. And I think yet another backup John has been exposed in the expansion draft, if you will.
Yeah, and also on the other end of it, if he was on 3 weeks in a row, CBC would probably start to think that maybe he was doing this as an actual side thing, and he might get in trouble for that. So
Right. And the amount of feedback we got of how good our podcast was with him on it.
We can't be having that now.
No. We got to keep the bar nice and low. We love Dan. Dan's an awesome guy. As you alluded to, commitments at the CBC. But we love having Dan on, except he isn't just on indefinite suspension, shall we call it, because of a shitty pick of beer?
Yeah, maybe. Or the next time you're unavailable, whichever comes first.
That's fair. And with 2 kids under 6 and a newborn in the house, that might happen a couple times this year.
Something that seems to have happened for the first time, and we would be amiss if we did not talk about this as 2 men who love to embrace the dumb.
Yes.
Whether that's football, sports, or just life in general. If you're listening from outside of Saskatchewan right now, you might not have heard this story right now this week.
And it's a shame because you need to hear it.
It is phenomenal in just about every way. So I'm gonna read basically the RCMP release as it was written, because it's also it's actually a very good written job by the Tisdale RCMP. So here we go.
Let's go.
9:45 a.m. A Leroy, Saskatchewan man took cravings for some ice cream to a whole new level and landed in the middle of a Tisdale RCMP investigation. On July 31st at approximately 5 p.m., Tisdale RCMP received a complaint that a helicopter had landed in a high-traffic parking lot on 101st Street in Tisdale, Saskatchewan. When it landed, the helicopter blew up dust and debris through the area, which includes schools, an aquatic center, and more. Investigation determined that the landing was not an emergency. We'll debate that in a second. A passenger of the helicopter exited the aircraft and entered a nearby restaurant, i.e. Dairy Queen, to buy an ice cream cake. Officers determined the pilot, a 34-year-old man from Leroy, was licensed to drive the helicopter, but that it was illegal to land it where he did. On August 4th, the pilot was charged with 1 count of dangerous operation of an aircraft under the criminal code, blah, 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 and will appear in court on September 7th in Melford.
I think, so the best part of all of this, personally, is Lacey is from Engelfeld, which is not far from Leroy. And every year at Engelfeld Hogfest, there's a dude that for a donation to charity will fly you in his helicopter. After you sent me the story and after I replied, I instantly texted Lacey. I'm like, that has to be the helicopter guy from Hogfest. So I did more sleuthing. She's like, yeah, I totally think it is, because she has been up in that helicopter going for a ride before. They did not stop at a Dairy Queen, which is why it was all good and legal. So I do more investigating. I put on my Sherlock Holmes hat. I do not have a Watson. I work alone.
A side note, I love that you've put more effort into finding out this than researching anything to do with what we actually talk about on this podcast.
What are you talking about? I sit at a desk. You saw the desk when you were at my house. I'm like, this is where I podcast from now. There's a computer there. But you are actually correct on that. So I then go to my father-in-law, who's a shuttle driver at Enns Toyota with me. And I said, first off, Don, have you heard about this? Second, do you think it's the guy? And he goes, oh, yeah, he has a farm near Tisdale. And I'm like, wow, he had a hankering. It was hot yesterday. It was, a kind of day that you've probably been working. He probably said, F it, let's go grab some ice cream. I'm enraged that he was charged for this, because I can tell you, I have personally seen this man's helicopter skills. Not only have I seen his helicopter skills, for there has never been a helicopter-related incident in all the years of Engelfeld Hogfest, but I can tell you, if you can operate a motor vehicle successfully without falling asleep or puking out of it, after 3 days of Engelfeld Hogfest, you are a skilled navigator. If I knew anything about law, I'd offer to, be his lawyer, but my whole basis would be like, come on, this was really cool. Whatever Karen called this into the RCMP needs to go and chkai a little here, or whatever the male Karen is. What is the male Karen?
I think it's Kyle. I don't know. I don't remember.
Kyle? Keith? Keith's just an ugly name. But I who hasn't been tempted?
Because, I looked it up, because, I don't know that area super well. Obviously, I've heard of all the towns there.
Right.
And, let's face it, the ice cream cake at Dairy Queen, the ice cream is fine. It is what it is.
Right.
But what you want, what the craving is that cookie fudge centerpiece that you could just buy, bulks of that, and I would just eat that, and I would be extremely happy.
Right.
And Sheldon Jones is probably just thrilled that we're talking about Dairy Queen right now, but regardless.
Yes.
So I can completely understand. I can completely understand the desire to get that. I think, unfortunately the rules are what they are. He broke them. He should probably face a fine for that, whatever. But it might have been worth it. Because even though they deemed it not an emergency, I would argue sometimes a ice cream craving could be considered an emergency, depending on the situation.
I would concur, yes.
If you check it out on Google Maps, it's about an hour and a half drive from Leroy to Tisdale. So if that's how long it's going to take you to get Dairy Queen ice cream, or the ice cream cake, and you had a helicopter, everyone in our position would have done the exact same thing.
100%. Now what I wonder...
Because, it would have been melted by the time you got home if you drove. That'd be silly.
Right. But now what I wonder, has he done this before to Humboldt? Because Humboldt is also a short helicopter, and that's where he does his helicopter stuff, is in the Humboldt area. I think he's ever just, landed near McDonald's, picked up a McDouble, and pitter-patter? Has he gone to Melfort before?
I don't know. It's possible. We don't know.
It just seems like the casualness...
Because, it's like anything, of other certain criminal activities that happen, it's not usually a one-off, right?
No.
Different severities, but, not at all to compare this to this at all. It's like when drunk drivers get caught. It's not because they drove drunk once.
Right.
So, it's possible that I'm not accusing the guy of anything, but it's possible he's done this before at other places, just no one gave a crap.
Exactly. Clearly, This falls on the town of Tisdale for being lame. And this comes from a town that, by your research, is close to some place called Nut Mountain.
Yes.
Maybe Keith, whomever called the RCMP, needs to venture up old Nut Mountain with an ice cream cake and just let the mountain live up to its name.
Especially if he grabbed his Manscaped 4.0 before that.
Oh, you even got to slide into the Manscaped. That was the king of transitions. The king of transitions, Joel Gasson. It's funny, I heard somebody praising Jamie Nye for that, and it wasn't even a very good one. It was. I'm like, nah. My boy Gas does it better. So, speaking of Manscaped, it is the. Sorry, I'm going to read the script here, the ad read, and it is the Space PP 4.0 copy. I'm a child and I see PP and I know it's performance package, but I think PP and Manscaped. Anyways, attention listeners across the galaxy, all the way. Now, they probably want us to be more global, but I think this should be more appropriate. All the way from Come By Chance, Newfoundland to Climate, Saskatchewan. Do we have a pube problem? Gas says you're supposed to insert some space music here.
We don't edit on this program.
That would be against their philosophy. So I'm just going to go pew, 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 lasers. If we do have a pube problem, which I hope I don't offend Jacques. I am due for some time with my Lawnmower 4.0. Our friends at Manscaped have cleared you for takeoff with their 4th generation and brand new Lawnmower 4.0. Kick your pubes to the next planet. With the Performance Package 4.0, the orbits in your pants will feel like you're in zero gravity when you use the best tools for the job from the leaders in male grooming. Join the 2 million men worldwide, including yours truly. Trust Manscaped and get your rocket ready for takeoff by going to manscaped.com for 20% off plus free shipping with the code FANSIDED20. As soon as I read rocket ready for takeoff, did you ever see the Matt Stone, Trey Parker movie Orgasmo?
No, I have not.
Okay. In this one part, Orgasmo, the superhero, the titular hero of the movie, has something he calls the cock rocket.
Mm-hmm.
And his superpower is going, cock rocket away! And it's like a rocket cock that flies off of there. So if you also have that, just use the Lawnmower 4.0 trimmer, and the cock rocket will guide you on your journey to trim your body, balls, butts.
Or we can go through Austin Powers with the rocket scene where they keep interrupting at the right point where they're about to say dick, and then they use a different word for dick.
It's so good. Orgasmo, trust me, is much more in your face. But
I'm sure, yes.
It's like from like the pre-basketball era. Like I think that's when they were still doing movies before they really hit it off of South Park. It's classic. So, as an aside, buy a Lawnmower 4.0, get 20% off plus free shipping with the code FANSIDED20, manscaped.com, 20% off plus free shipping with the code FANSIDED20 at manscaped.com for a clean Trinity and beyond. It's supposed to be Infinity and beyond, and my kids just got Buzz Lightyear jammies from their grandma. So now I'm going to go upstairs and see those and have to think of the line, your space balls, thank you. I'm not shitting you. My kids went right from daycare to my mother and father-in-law's, and their great-grandma sent a baby welcome gift that included Buzz Lightyear jammies, and here I am talking about cock rockets and my Quipmunk while quoting Toy Story. So that's a thing that's going to happen tonight.
Good times. Good times.
Always great.
So yeah, we actually have football games to talk about today, if you can believe it or not. What? The Riders 1-0 on the season after an eventful game against the BC Lions. I don't know if it was a good game or not, but it was certainly entertaining for a lot of different reasons. So we're going to get into kind of the good, the bad, and the dumb of that game. Various things on that, of course. We're going to talk about the whole Michael Reilly saga. We'll talk about the hit Cody Fajardo takes, and we'll look ahead a little bit as well to the game this week against the Hamilton Ticats, and touch a little bit on the ratings perhaps through TSN on week 1 of the CFL on TSN. But as usual, before we get to all that, on your mighty return, John, what is in the glass this week?
On my mighty return, I have brought one of my mightiest top beers that exist. of course, now when my parents come out to visit, my mom came out to obviously, coincidentally, she was on her way out to visit when baby Maya was born.
Mm-hmm.
I said, don't worry about bringing out like care package or anything. Just pick me up some Lake of the Woods beer. And there's two in particular that I love that I haven't found. Like Lake of the Woods, if you're listening in Northern Ontario, go pick up their stuff. It's all like just top notch. But I would say, you know, you can find Kolsch's, you can find Pilsners, you can find all that kind of normal stuff here. Like, I mean, you can get that from our partners at Pile of Bones. You get it from the guys at Rebellion, Nokomis, Blackbridge. What you can't get is some of the unique stuff that Lake of the Woods has. And if you ever find it, if you're ever going through Northern Ontario, and I believe parts of Manitoba, you need to find it. One of them being the Forgotten Lake Blueberry Ale. A, it is strong. B, it comes as advertised. It's an ale made with blueberries and crisp Lake of the Woods water.
Is the color of the beer actually like blue or the purplish?
It's that purplish, yeah.
Okay.
It actually does. When you pour it into a glass, it does.
That's how you know it was actually made with the real fruit and not just extract.
Absolutely. And they say it real fruit, real blueberries. It's been one of their staples for as long as I've been drinking their product, which is at least a few years now. So it's one that I always ask my parents to bring out, and I'm going to try to find a way to load up for myself when I'm back home for Labor Day weekend. But it's outstanding. Try it. The other one I love as well that I know won't last until next week's episode, so I should shout it out now, is their peach beer. It is beer. It is peach. It's same thing. It comes out a little cloudy, little hazy, real ingredients. Great beer. If you can find anything from Lake of the Woods, wherever you may be, I feel like it's one of those things that you just randomly stumble upon one day and find it. Maybe like a craftier place. Like I know Ingredients here in Saskatoon has a lot of beers you don't normally find. I haven't found Lake of the Woods there, but if you can find it, if you're listening in Manitoba or Ontario, go get it. It is top notch, and I can also personally vouch. I don't know if it's the lake water they use or the real ingredients, but you can drink a shitload of them and not feel that bad the next day.
So if you happen to find some, you can mail some to John at...
I would actually give you my home address. I don't care how murdery you are. Like if you're like murdery stalkery, I might give you my work address, but I'm pretty sure you can figure that out. Just don't.
Where do you work again? I don't think you've ever mentioned it on this podcast.
No. What a rare thing.
It's so rare.
I try to keep it to a minimum after, some people almost got me fired for calling them a bunch of rubes and boomers, but who's kidding? We all know I work at Ens Toyota.
Mm-hmm. For me, when I was leaving work today, I decided to pick up a 4-pack of one of your favorites, hoping that you had to drink one of your budget beers this evening.
No, I got good beers this evening. Don't worry.
So I kind of wanted to
worse shit though.
I wanted to rub it in a little bit as I picked up the Blackbridge Uno IPA, which is of course the single version of their double IPA, if that makes sense. And their double IPA is one of the absolute best beers you'll ever find in this province. So this is, of course, just slightly hopped down a little bit, a little less alcohol, just nice, easy drinking IPA.
It's so good. I think, and I know we're dangerously close to talking too much about my equipment, but I promise I was wearing shorts. When I went to Moose Jaw once, Lacey and I actually sprung for the suite at the Temple Gardens where you had a hot tub. Never forget, it was like peak relaxation of my life. We had not had Max yet. And I was sitting in the hot tub in my room watching a Bomber game, drinking an Uno IPA, and it was just pure bliss. And now here I am in front of you, Joel, a man with about 4 hours of sleep a night dating back to last Wednesday.
Yeah. Life comes at you fast, eh?
It sure does, and it kicks you right in the dick.
Speaking of coming at you, speaking of coming at life coming at you fast, that Rider game sure was something.
Woo! That was a thing.
Because that was 2-3 games in one. And I think sort of the big question that comes out of it is, are you concerned at all? Because, I mean, or are you, like, or is any, like, I'm talking to you, the fans, not necessarily just you. Like,
right.
Because I think the biggest question is, which team are they? Are they the team that jumped out to a 31-0 lead and seemed unstoppable through the first 25 minutes or so? Mm-hmm. Or were they the team that effectively couldn't do anything in the second half? And I think the second half is more so the big question, because I think, they got off to a really good start. I think a lot of that was sort of adrenaline of the moment, and the game and, the whole thing, first game in 628 days or something, packed Mosaic Stadium, the fans are going nuts. There's a whole, it's not surprising that they got off to a fast start.
Right.
It's surprising they got off to that fast of a start, I think.
Oh,
but
it's ridiculous.
Then the second half came around and it all kind of fell apart. And I think there's a lot of reasons for that. I mean, Craig Dickinson kind of hit on them. He said he felt they kind of let off the gas a little bit, which when you jump up like that happens. And we've seen it time and time again, in, especially in football, when you jump out to that big lead, and you do let up a little bit, it's hard to get it going again.
It is. Yep.
And that's essentially what we saw in that football game. And it should have cost them that game.
Yes,
If the Lions had kicking in that game, they would have won. But instead, they got lucky with some missed field goals and whatnot. So all of that happened, and then they still ended up winning. And at the end of the day, that's what matters. But I don't think we're any closer to knowing anything about this team.
No.
And I think this is true across the league right now, where we're not going to know anything about any of these teams probably for about a month.
Right.
Because, Calgary lost. Hamilton didn't look great. Toronto looked pretty good. Ottawa looked bad, but still won. Edmonton's just weird, as we kind of expected in some ways. BC was also showing ups and downs. So, it's going to take time for us to figure out what these teams are. And it's going to be really fun and interesting to try and make power rankings over the last few weeks, because we were asked to put ours in for this week on 3 Down Nation, and I was just like,
pick them in throw them in a hat. Which it's funny you mentioned the chaos, because I have a friend of mine that doesn't know a lot about the CFL. He's in a pick'em pool at work, and he's like, hey, can you make my picks for me? If I win something, I'll buy you some beer or something. I said, okay, sounds good. Him and I went 1-3 in the first week. The one win being the Riders win, because again, it's just like you said, it's going to be chaos.
I think I managed to pull out 2-2, which is always kind of like the minimum I like to do, is to avoid the 1-3, 0-4 week, basically.
Right. See, I had a problem because part of me knows how powerful the Fraser curse is. So I have a hard time picking Winnipeg, even though my brain's like, pick Winnipeg. They're at home. They're raising the banner. They're still cohesive. They're not missing.
That Hamilton O-line was beaten up. Yeah. Exactly.
But part of me is still like, don't Fraser curse them, because there is power in that curse, as we have proven time and time again. I think for the Riders, a couple things encouraged me. One being Cody Fajardo was able to, he didn't shrink in that moment. Here's a guy that in his second year as a starting quarterback in this league that, we all hope he does well. And I think everybody just kind of accepted he's going to do well, but still, it's a question mark. It's a second year as a starter in the league. This is a guy that admittedly was emotional in the tunnel before the game. He was fired up. He was ready to go. And to take a guy like that in only his first real year, where he knew coming in he was going to be the starting quarterback, for him to take that and channel it in what I thought was a very solid performance, I think was great. I think that is a good sign that Cody is going to be who we hope Cody will be. I
saw some chatter on Twitter after that he didn't get to 300 yards, but I would argue with anyone about that, considering the lead they got. I'm like, you find me a quarterback that has a 31-0 lead in the first half, and if they're not already at 300 yards, finishes the game with over 300 yards passing.
Oh, and it never happened. And the big thing, the 80% completion percentage. With only one
he completed his first 15.
Well, that's it.
Which was insane.
He looked crisp. He looked ready. He didn't look overwhelmed.
Yeah, well, I joked in the press box after the first drive. I was like, well, yeah, they had like 2 years to work on that drive.
It did. You know what, though? It did look like an orchestrated drive.
They always are. They always are. Yeah.
Absolutely. But I was impressed. I was really impressed with Cody's composure. I was impressed with the O-line.
I think early on it got away from them a little bit. Like there was never any glaring, terrible play from the offensive line, I thought.
Right.
But especially early on in that first half of that game, Jason Moss treated them like a rookie group they essentially were. And it was, okay, we're calling quick plays. Like Cody Fajardo was getting the ball out in like 2 seconds or less. So there was no time for any pass rush to get there. I don't think BC has a good pass rush, which certainly helped in that scenario as well.
Right.
But at the same time, it was very quick plays. William Powell was really involved early. And they went for it. And I especially liked what I saw to Jason Maas early when it was that 3rd and 2 just over midfield, and they went for it. They went for it with an 11-yard pass to Karen Moore. Then they ended up getting a touchdown later. So we'll get into an opposite decision in the second half later. But early on, they got aggressive, and it paid off.
Well, and I even remember I was between holding Maya and entertaining the kids and everything and drinking. At one point, Lacey's beer wasn't cold enough, so I was drinking 3 drinks at once. My mom had gotten me a good beer. I was drinking a budget beer, and then Lacey handed me one. So literally drinking three, and I took the time to go. I love that 3rd and 2. I loved. What does concern me, speaking strictly offensively, as we're on the topic, who decided to not use William Powell in the second half? That's what concerns me.
I mean, I would have to go back and really watch it to see if BC changed anything to really, discourage the run. That's the only thing that would jump out at me as why they did it so, why they got away from it so much. Right. I would hope you would still try a little bit more than they did, even if the box is stacked against you. It still helps to try a little bit every once in a while. Because, William Powell looked pretty good in the first half, and then...
He did.
Then just didn't see the ball the rest of the game, and I think that hurt them.
Well, and I think one of the biggest, back to the O-line, every offensive lineman I've ever spoken to, I've had several friends that have played the position, says the best way for them to get into the game is some run blocking.
Oh, absolutely. It gets them going downhill, gets the mojo going, gets them being aggressive rather than passive trying to block.
Exactly. So I was concerned that this is going to become a pattern that, because you're right, 12 carries, 43 yards, Powell looked good.
Mm-hmm.
He looked like the guy they're going to need a run game or teams are just going to pin their ears back and come after Cody, and you can't have that, right?
No.
So that was my biggest concern on offense, was not the way they performed, but the way that they suddenly decided to get one-dimensional, and I don't know why they would have done that. By this point, again, with the triple fisting and the parenting and all that, I wasn't paying that close of attention to BC's defensive fronts, but I was surprised at how little William Powell was used, and I hope maybe that was we're trying some things. We want to get Shaq Evans going because he was not in that game. We want to do some good things and get guys into a rhythm rather than we're just not going to run the ball.
Yeah. And I mean, it was an interesting situation the coaching staff was in that game. Let's say hypothetically BC didn't mount any sort of a comeback and it stayed the blowout that it was at the time. It was a scenario where I think if you very likely would not have seen a lot of backups come in just because it had been so long since all these guys had played, where it would be okay, would it really be beneficial to give Isaac Harker some reps right now, or do you want to actually give Cody Fajardo some more work, Right. So, I mean, it didn't work out that way, but it would have been an interesting scenario to see play out.
Right.
But as we know, it didn't stay the blowout, and I think this is obviously where there is concerns, but again, it's week 1 of the CFL season. And
with no preseason. In a normal year, it takes 3 to 4 weeks before we really know who's good in the CFL and who's bad. Without a preseason and without having any games at all last year, it may take a little bit longer, and there's going to be wild swings all over the place on this thing right now. So I think there's something to learn from what happened to the Riders in that game. They shouldn't just brush it aside as week 1 for sure. They should certainly learn from it, but it's not a reason to be alarmed either, I would say. No, I would agree. One thing I found fascinating too, and I think a lot of people were blaming the defense for the comeback, especially when Michael Reilly looked more like me throwing the ball.
Yeah.
A lot of quackers. I mean, obviously making the right decisions, but
yeah.
I was concerned, and as a casual observer, as someone who'd never really seen anything like that before in my years of watching broadcasting football, I'm going, oh shit, this defense can't stop a guy that can't throw. And then it was Nick Marshall, who, again, has his own faults on the left.
Yeah, we saw a little bit of old Nick Marshall there for the boom and bust, but yeah.
We certainly did. But the thing that I found so interesting was his post-game comment that...
Yeah, so if you didn't see it, Glenn Reed of CBC asked the question about it. He basically asked, was like, well, you know, Michael Reilly comes in and he's clearly not throwing the ball right. He's not throwing the ball well. You know, is that an adjustment like a knuckleballer in baseball? And Nick Marshall basically said, yeah.
Well, that's exactly it, right? Yeah. I mean, you could tell, especially with the pass interference and illegal contact rules, the Riders' defensive backs almost didn't know what to do. When do you hit a guy when he's basically sitting? It's almost like a fair catch situation in the NFL where he's just like sitting under this ball waiting for it to fall. The hell do you do?
Yeah.
You almost got to like wait for him to catch it. And BC does have some talented receivers that knew to come back to the ball, that knew what to do with the ball. So I don't know if I'm so concerned with the defense.
I think, and Craig Dickinson said it too, I think they got tired.
Oh,
like,
100%,
there's all like, and this is going to happen to every team across the league for a little bit here. The conditioning just isn't quite there to play a full 60 minutes of football. And I think especially the way that the offense was sputtering in the second half definitely did them no favors either for the defense.
No, you're absolutely right? I mean, and you could kind of see that league-wide if you watched a bunch of the games this weekend.
Or the entire Edmonton-Ottawa game.
Oh, God.
You know a game is bad when the broadcasters are trying to defend it as good.
Yeah. You know when friend of the show and friend of ours, Colin Hodgson, is talking up the fact that Shaun White is a really good guy, which, for the record, I got to play online poker with Shaun White this offseason. Tremendous human. And you just find yourself, you're like, but Shaun White's a good guy? Let's go, Shaun. You're kicking some field goals. You're doing the thing. Let's go. And that was about it. That was all it had going for it. You know a game is bad when I had decided to go to bed. And I got into my bed and I did my last Twitter scroll of the night. And it's like, interception. Ottawa takes the lead. And I'm like, fuck it, I ain't watching this. I ain't turning it back on. That's normally the moment when you're like, oh, this game got good. I will turn on my bedroom TV and watch this. And I went, well, this one's so crap. I'm not going to watch it at all.
Mm-hmm.
So, thankfully, the Rider game was not at all like that, Joel.
No, and I mean there was no short of entertainment as well. I mean there was the whole whatever was going on with Michael Reilly. I mean in the moment it definitely felt very strange. And I remember I tweeted myself. I was like, so I guess depth charts don't matter still.
Right.
But I think since then the picture has become pretty clear that I don't think there was any attempt at misdirection, and if there was, it didn't work. Because it sounds like by all accounts, you know, Reilly just made these decisions at the last second all around. Because the one that really, the game time thing, okay, that is what it is at this point.
Right.
It's just the halftime one was so strange to me. The Rick Campbell's out there talking about how it's better for Michael Reilly if he doesn't play, blah, 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 blah. And all of a sudden he's playing in the second half, and that's just not a good look on coach to be like, do you actually have control of the situation right now?
Right. And I agree with you. But I almost wonder, one thing I found interesting was watching the dynamic between Nathan Rourke and Michael Reilly through that game.
Mm-hmm.
And watching the way that Michael Reilly was very much involved, showing him charts. It's almost a little bit like a move you see a lot in lacrosse.
Yeah.
Where the starting goaltender is struggling. He'll get pulled for 5 minutes to just watch from the bench, and then he goes back in. Usually a quick conversation with his backup, and then all is well. And I kind of got that vibe there that, like, Rourke being thrown to the fire didn't look great in the first half. It almost felt like Reilly falling on the sword a little. You know, to me, that was I got that Michael Reilly was like, okay, I'm going to go out there. It's going to hurt. It's not going to be great. But you need some time to just Chikai.
That's fair, yeah.
And I feel like, again, I've never interviewed him. I don't know him personally. I just feel like that's on brand for Michael Reilly.
Mm-hmm.
And you could see the difference in Nathan Rourke after that.
Mm-hmm.
It was like Reilly went out, showed him what he was seeing, struggled through it, gritted through it. He's a tough guy. He's a competitor. And then Nathan Rourke came out and actually looked really good which is awesome because the guy's a Canadian, and B, now he's better prepared for that second start. So that's kind of the vibe I got. It was almost like, I'm going to go out and just try to make this a thing. Holy crap, we're back in it. I'm really sore. You need to go back in. I hope you're relaxing and see things now.
Yeah, I hadn't thought of it that way. That's certainly a fair approach. I think if he could have, Michael Reilly probably would have finished the game, but regardless, he eventually put the team in the right spot to get there, and decided that he didn't have enough in the tank to get them over the finish line. They couldn't quite get over the finish line, but regardless, I think Nathan Rourke eventually looked pretty good, and that's nothing but positive for a Canadian kid that has a lot of expectations on him, mostly from Justin Dunk.
I feel like Justin Dunk is like that parent, that hardo parent that's like, I couldn't fulfill my dreams, so you're going to fulfill my dreams, and Nathan Rourke is his son now.
There's always the next one.
I mean, both of them are handsome AF, so I mean, it kind of makes sense.
The Rider quarterback in the game, though, was surrounded by a little bit of controversy. I'm kind of making a point this year, unless it's absolutely unavoidable, especially more so in my post-game pieces. We'll talk about it a little bit on the pod, but to not really talk about officiating too much if I can avoid it.
Right.
I don't think there's everything tends to even out and all this sort of stuff over the course of a season. But there was the play at the goal line where he took the shot to the head. It was pretty clearly to me a headshot that wasn't flagged on the play. And that, and he said after the game, he's like, I guess I'm not a big enough name to get that call yet. I don't know if that's true or not. I mean, it's a good little one-liner at least, but he is one of the bigger names in this league. So if he didn't get that call, it's hard to believe many other guys would if you're basing it on reputation.
Right.
But it was a whole interesting scenario that played out. The call was missed. It is what it is at this point. The BC Lion has been fined, so there's clearly some admission of an error was missed there. But it was a whole calamity of weird things that I wish I had thought about more in the time to add it to the piece is more of, it was just an all-around kind of dumb situation. Okay, yes, there should have been a penalty. But then it turned out that basically, when they reviewed it, Craig Dickinson basically, and this was thanks to Steven Safamod of the Pivots podcast, that kind of enlightened me to this, because I hadn't really thought about the play a whole lot since. Because to me, the end zone angle clearly showed Cody Fajardo get hit in the head by a helmet.
Right.
Anyway, but then it was basically Craig Dickinson challenged for roughing the passer, because he can't really challenge unnecessary roughness.
Right.
And so it became a whole thing with that. So he basically was just hoping that they would potentially still see him as a passer in that situation, even though he clearly wasn't. So, I mean, it was a whole lot of different things that was happening in that one moment. I don't really blame Dickinson for the challenge at that time, though in retrospect, he probably wishes he hadn't, because there was a complete pass later that he probably could have been able to challenge and win, where it looked like it hit the ground. But regardless... And what really gets me out of the whole thing, out of all of that, Cody Fajardo fights tooth and nail to, get back to the half-yard line. They try to do everything to get the penalty called, and then they still can say the safety after all that.
I know. Right.
I was like, after all this, you did everything possible to avoid the safety, and you can see
and you still do it, which mathematically says you should never, ever, ever do it. God!
I mean,
I hate conceding the safety.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's one of the ones that did work out, but bad decisions work out sometimes too. So I'm with you. Don't ever concede safeties. You never see it in any other type of football. When teams are at the 1 yard line or the half-yard line in any other football, they punt.
Yep.
So I thought about it like today, basically before we came to record this, and I was like, man, that whole thing was so dumb. I should have thought of it more at the time.
but that's. And I think, I'm glad that I do have personal bias talking about the CFL reps. Is I have two CFL officials I would consider friends of mine.
Yeah.
So I have a hard time knowing personally the effort that those guys have put in for decades to get to that spot. It's hard for me to rip anything right now. I think what we all need to remember is outside of a couple scrimmages at camps and maybe officiating some drills, the entire CFL officiating crew hasn't done a game in 600 days either. There was no U Sports. There was no CJFL. There was no way for these guys to stay on top of their game, which already is a part-time job. There are not full-time CFL officials yet. So the fact that I would say out of this whole weekend, that is the only call you could kind of say you blew it. And I do believe it was a missed call.
Yeah.
And I think any official watching that tape would agree. Mm-hmm. But the fact that in the officials' first game in 600 days, working their regular jobs, focusing on their families, focusing on their careers, just trying to stay in shape for working something at game speed and having no warm-up, like nothing.
Yeah. The
fact that one helmet-to-helmet hit is all we're talking about really is... like, those guys should put the feather in the cap. Like, that they only came out of, like, remember when the NFL had replacement officials and what a shit show that was?
Yeah.
For these guys working part-time to come out and largely make the opening week of CFL football controversy-free, minus a call that I think everybody universally admits that they've blown, kudos to them. I'm going to give them a lot of credit. It was a missed call, but I got to give them a lot of credit. Yeah,
it happens. It happens. And I've said it on this podcast, and I'll continue to say it. I think the CFL has some of the best officiating in sports.
I would agree, especially considering that these guys all have full-time jobs.
Yeah.
Like NFL officials, for getting paid a significant amount of money to do their job full-time, they kind of suck. And I get it. You need 16 crews instead of, 4. But still, you so rarely hear about officiating controversies. You don't hear about the Tim Peel bullshit that we heard about in the NHL. It's just kudos to those guys. And again, I see this with extreme bias because I know a couple guys, and I'll be the first to admit it, but kudos to those guys. I'm with you on that one.
Yeah. So that puts pretty much a wrap on week one. The other sort of interesting tidbit for me from week one overall in the CFL was the television ratings. And we're a couple of media nerds around here, so I'm always kind of interested when this stuff comes out. I know the average viewer, listener doesn't really care all that much, but there is some interest in sort of the overall health of the league that you can kind of read into it. And it's fair to say that I think it was a good news, bad news weekend for the CFL on that front. Week one, the opening game between the Bombers and the Ticats, listening to Duncan Hodge, it was up about 100,000 viewers from the season opener the year before, which involved the Riders. So the fact that just in pure numbers, there's a huge jump in the season opener is very encouraging news. The Riders game was obviously big as well. So the first two games, both 600 plus, the Rider game 700 plus. But then Saturday came, and neither of those games cracked 400,000. And while, I understand the TV landscape has changed, the sports world has changed, everything's changed. To me, that 400, that sort of 450 mark is probably, to me, for a CFL regular season game, still kind of the bar to be like, okay, that's not bad. So if you're below that, I'm like, eesh. And that's a little concerning.
It is, and I will play a little devil's advocate here. I don't think anybody in Toronto gives a damn yet.
No. It's also, sort of a concerning trend of, what's going on in Alberta too, that they couldn't push that up a little bit because, there were only 23,000 fans at the game in Calgary.
Right.
And that was the third lowest game of the league. I think the Edmonton-Ottawa game did even worse. Ottawa games generally don't seem to draw that well television-wise, and especially a 10 Eastern start wasn't going to help them in that regard either.
No. And I get it. It was a shitty weekend to be up against, but I think you're right in the fact that the landscape has changed so much. And it is something I think the CFL is going to have to be very much aware of. I mean, your Rider games are always going to draw huge. I think with Winnipeg finally being good again, Hamilton's always going to draw huge. I hope if the Argos are as good as I think they're going to be this year, maybe you start getting some eyeballs out of the Golden Horseshoe. for the Argos, but that is a worrying number, especially for the first games in 600 days. And it's not like there was 58,000 at there's 58,000 at Commonwealth. Okay, I can give you a bit of a pass.
They got to 30 at Edmonton, though, so that was good.
Which is still, a solid number. That's 30,000 people that probably would have been watching that game, but it's I don't think you sound the alarm yet because, as you mentioned before we started recording, we had Olympics, we had baseball, and I think what you're especially going to find for summer rating, I generally think that summer ratings in the CFL are going to be down because
for sure.
As Saskatchewan and Alberta have just decided COVID's over, you're going to have people going out and living their lives as much as they can before Delta shuts us all down again. So I don't think it's time to sound the alarm yet.
No, I would agree. It's not like this isn't like, oh my God, everyone panic, but it is. I think it is worth keeping an eye on to see whether this was sort of a one-off or if there's a trend developing.
It's like when you're using your lawnmower 4.0 and you feel something that might be a little off there. You make sure you go over the spot a couple times. That's for you, Jacques.
So that we'll have to wait and see what the ratings will bring in terms of the CFL this week. But the Riders, of course, will be taking on the Hamilton Ticats at Mosaic Stadium in front of what's continuing to look like a much smaller crowd. That's neither here nor there at this point. But it's going to be a fascinating football game for me, I think, at a lot of different levels, because I think both teams are kind of in sort of the same situation right now where you don't really know where they're at. One won and one lost, obviously, but a lot of the problems are sort of similar right now. Both offensive lines are question marks. So I think basically, to break it down in sort of the dumbest, most obvious level, is whoever's offensive line holds up best is going to win this game, right?
I would agree. In this, I actually get to feel like I know what the hell I'm talking about for a moment, because the two football games I watched the most of were the Riders and the Bombers games. I think Hamilton looked really shitty. Like, I don't know if Winnipeg is really good, and I don't feel like I can ever admit Winnipeg's really good because Fraser Curse and all.
It almost feels like Winnipeg just has that number over Hamilton.
Right, but on the same note, I would argue that at no point did Hamilton look good in that game. They had a decent opening drive, and outside of that, it was another 15 minutes of football that they looked like a bad, disjointed, dysfunctional, frustrated football team. Like the body language on Brandon Banks, which Rod Black could not stop talking about, it wasn't good.
I mean, he gets like that though. You get in his kitchen, and he gets in his head real easy. So that's something to keep an eye on.
Well, and that's exactly it. And it'd been a while since Mazzoli had played, and Hamilton never once scared me as a Blue Bomber fan. And that's saying something as a Bomber fan, because we are all expecting they score that opening drive touchdown. I turned to my father-in-law who was over visiting, and I went, well, 3-year grace period, because I'm a big believer in the grace period. I can't seriously bitch about my Blue Bombers for 3 years after they won a Grey Cup.
No, I think that's fair. Yep.
It's 5 years in any other sport. But Hamilton did not look good. And I even think at Saskatchewan's worst, they looked at least as good as Hamilton's best. That's what I'm going to be watching for. I think the Riders learned some lessons about themselves, and I don't want to call a blowout because Fraser Curse, but I'm fairly confident the Riders win this week.
I'm not so much. Spoiler alert on 3 Down Nation. It'll probably be posted by the time you actually listen to this podcast. I did take the Hamilton Ticats just because I think their offensive line is going to hold up a little bit better. That Ticat pass rush is a lot better than BC with the likes of Jagarrett Davis. So I'm not as confident in the offensive line having as strong of a game. I don't think they're going to get crushed by any stretch of the imagination. I think this could be a very good football game. I think it has the potential to be. So I just don't really know. This is the game we're just going to have. This is one of those games where we might learn something about these teams after this game, depending on sort of what happens. If the Riders come out strong like they did against BC, they're obviously not going to go up 31-0 again, we would imagine. But if they look solid, then they can keep that going through basically the course of a game, I think we'll have an idea of who they are. If they come out and shit the bed, we also may have an idea of who they are a little bit more. And that basically goes the same way. I think for Hamilton's case, there's probably at least a little more longer until we know who they are, because they were bad against Winnipeg. So if they're good this week against the Riders, the question is, well, which one are they, right? There's no yin or yang in that first game in terms of who they were. So this is not necessarily a benchmark game for them, but could be a correction game for them where they move on. And I think ultimately, I still think Hamilton's going to end up being one of the best, if not the best team in the CFL this year. And honestly, it might be better for them to actually struggle for a bit first for once.
Nobody makes me bleed my own blood kind of thought. I am higher on Montreal than I am on Hamilton, and I think that went back to my preseason picks.
I mean, if you looked at my preseason picks on 3downnation.com as well, you will realize I did not pick Hamilton to get to the Grey Cup, though.
Right.
I picked Montreal as well. So.
Right, and I think Montreal has a better chance now. Again, as you mentioned, things we're going to discover. We're also going to discover, when Winnipeg plays Toronto, because those are two teams that looked really good in the first week.
I'll be very interested to see. I think we know who. I think out of all the teams in the CFL right now, we probably know the most about the Bombers than anyone else. So I will be very intrigued to see what the Argos do in that game.
Yeah, no, certain as would I, and I think a good Argos team, not only for my bold Grey Cup pick, looks good, but for the fact that it's good for the league to have a decent Argos team.
Yeah. And before we go, I would be amiss if we did not just give the Saskatchewan Roughriders organization some kudos for a very classy move that they did up in the press box for our friend Warren Woodsy.
Yeah.
Of course, I made it pretty clear, I've talked about it in the past, that I used to sit beside Woodsy in the press box. Mm-hmm. I've moved down 2 seats now because apparently Daryl Davis is now in the press box. He's given away his season tickets for the year. That's neither here nor there at this point, but
I was gonna say there's probably a better chance of sitting beside somebody vaccinated in the press box than in the stand. So I can't blame Daryl either.
I did not blame him at all. But yeah, his spot, seat number 22, has now been retired in memory for one Warren Woods. There's a little plaque there with his name on it and everything. So it's expected there's even supposed to be a bigger plaque coming in as well. I think the one's right there right now is just temporary. So full credit to the Saskatchewan Roughriders communications director Ariel Zur and the entire team that made that happen. It was certainly weird being at that game without Woodsy, as it would have been the first time I would have seen him since the 2019 West Final would have been at that game. So it was definitely strange for him not to be there, and I think all of us from the Regina media took a moment to kind of to stand around that seat for a second and think of our good friend.
I love the fact that the Riders and Ariel stepped up and did that, because I know you and I had discussed privately, never publicly, what you were going to do, because you were the guy that sat beside Woodsy. If you were assigned that seat, and you said, I'm going to shuffle down, and I was glad you were going to do that. Put it this way, Joel, I love Woodsy so much. I love listening to him, love my conversations with him. I might even go buy a Bohemian just to celebrate him here coming up on this Rider game on Friday.
Absolutely. That could be something a lot of people, I think, certainly could consider.
Want a website with unmatched power, speed, and control? Try Bluehost Cloud, the new web hosting plan from Bluehost, built for WordPress creators by WordPress experts. With 100% uptime, incredible load times, and 24/7 WordPress priority support, your sites will be lightning fast with global reach. And with Bluehost Cloud, your sites can handle surges in traffic no matter how big. Plus, you automatically get daily backups and world-class security. Get started now at Bluehost.com.